Welcome to the Fresh and Fired Up podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Marshall, here with my co-host, the wildly awesome Haley Pindle, who likes to grace us with her presence at least every once in a while. So thank you for being here today, Haley. We are ready to get fired up.
We are ready to get fired up. We got a special guest today.
We do. Do you want to introduce our special guest? Just throw you on the spot.
You've got the notes, Emily. You have the notes.
We have the wonderful Fiona Groves. She has so much going on in her life in the best way. We just got a glimpse of her accent, actually. Want to say hello, Fiona?
It's generally the more I talk, the more you hear it.
The more I talk.
Oh, I heard it right there.
If you want to, we could talk about strengthening our calves.
Our
and then it comes out.
That is great. Well,
or like halving our cardio.
I feel like you're accentuating, which is even better, by the way.
With that one, I'm not. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm impressed. I am so excited to have you on the show today. You are the menopause fitness bestie for so many women, right?
Yeah.
But you have all the expertise and credentials to go with it about training. You messaged me before this and you're like, okay, this topic that we're going to talk about today could possibly go on forever because you are so very passionate about helping women with their fitness in the perimenopause and menopause phase of life. So can you give us a bit more on your background and your expertise?
Yeah. So as you can hear, I'm originally from Australia. I've been in Canada for 18 years now, but then you'll hear some British come out too, because I lived in England before that. But yeah, I've been in the industry since 2010. I got certified as a personal trainer at the end of 2009. So I'm a certified personal trainer, group fitness instructor, nutrition coach, eating psychology coach. I'm also a body image coach. I'm also a 200-hour yoga teacher. And then last year, I actually finished my certification to be a menopause coach. I'm 45 myself. I'll be 46 this year, and I'm one of the long haulers when it comes to perimenopause. So it's just, I am just, my whole world revolves around trying to basically empower women to make this like the best time of their lives rather than fear it. So I got certified with Doula School Canada as a menopause doula. And then I also, as an additional certification, I did the Dr. Stacey Sims Menopause 2.0 course as well. So, and that's specifically working with the menopausal athlete. I mean, I work with all genders and ages, but I am now I found my niche now. And so I'm just starting to really specialize in women 40 plus.
And I think after all that being said, you might need to just hold your arm up and give us a little flash.
I was gonna say if you guys are watching YouTube, oh my gosh, this girl is like freaking jacked. I love it.
We're not kidding. Okay. It's not YouTube. Oh, there we go.
Oh, baby.
Mainly because this is a really good point. Thank you that you shared your age, because we have Haley in her 20s, I'm in my 30s, you're in your 40s. And it's really good for women to see other women across ages working out and being fit. And I think you can get to a certain age, you get into your 40s and get into your 50s and I think a lot of women start to believe that they can't build muscle anymore, or they can't get fit by that time. And it's just not true, as you know.
Well, and another thing too is that like, I want to get to the 20 and the 30-year-old women, because to be honest, it's what we do or don't do in those decades that will have a huge impact on what our journey is like from 40 plus. And yeah, I compete in CrossFit, I compete in bodybuilding. I'm just about to do my first strongman comp. So it's like, I just want to show women that it's like, you can still do it all. You can still gain lean muscle as you get older. And yeah, it's my world.
Yeah, I love that.
That being said too, like, do you think that's one of the biggest myths that kind of go around especially women's health, is like your metabolism slows down as you age, but it's got a large amount of due to, loss of muscle mass.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And like, if we aren't actioning it, then yes, we like, as we get older, we are at that risk of losing muscle mass at a faster rate. So if we know the things that we should be doing, we have the tools in our toolbox, and we put in the work in our 30s and our 20s, then it's going to make that either maintenance or building of muscle in your 40s and beyond possible. And I mean, it's interesting because like a couple of people, they're like, people often say to me, they're like, well, I mean, with regards to body composition, they're like, you don't get it, because to this point in time, I have not gained weight or visceral fat with my perimenopause journey. And my response is always, I believe it's because I put in the work to build the mass, especially in my 30s. Like that's when I really started focusing on lifting weights. So like I put in the work before I got to like basically this transition period in my life. So yeah.
It's so interesting that you say that, because it holds true. It holds true for so many people across so many sports. Like I think about with gymnastics, I will still drop into splits, not perfectly, but better than some of our younger athletes. And they're kind of like, what? And I'm like, guys, this is just years and years and years of doing this. And so you need to look at yourself right now. And I'm speaking to an 11-year-old. Look at yourself now and put in the work. I'm like, guys, you got to train it every single day. And they're like, okay. Like, I don't know if it's fully sinking in, but right. It's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not.
Definitely not splits. Are you
Nah, I coach the club volleyball girls in town. I'm the strength and wellness coach, which is like a little bit off topic, but it's a demographic I am so passionate about when it comes to like body image, being strong, being healthy, because it was so different when I was that age. And they were last night, they're like, Fiona, can you do the splits? And I'm like, not even close. And then a couple of them just like drop straight into the splits. I'm like, oh, you're going to snap.
That's great. You got to keep that mobility. Come on. But now we're getting off topic. No, that's great. So let's dive into what types of exercises are going to be most effective for women coming into menopause, perimenopause, and menopause.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, can I just pop in here? Because a lot of people, this is what I experience. Can you just explain what perimenopause is, menopause, and postmenopause is? Because nobody knows what that is.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you, Haley. Are you okay?
I'm fine. My microphone fell.
So
let's hear it.
Basically, like the menopause is a single moment in time. So like the textbooks per se, like they say it's like 12 months on the nose since a woman had her last menstrual period. The tricky thing with that is that sometimes it can be medically induced through surgery or say through chemotherapy, or if a woman has an IUD and she's not getting her period. Obviously, like she doesn't know what that 12-month is, but like the technical term is 12 months since a woman had her last menstrual period. Then she is technically, she has gone through the menopause. So after that, you are postmenopausal. I work with a lot of, like I work with a lot of women who are 70 plus, and I come across a lot lately. They're like, oh, I never went through that. And it's like, if you were born with a uterus, you are going to go through the menopause if you are fortunate enough to live that long, right? Not all of us have that blessing, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to see it as a gift. It means that you have gotten to this point in your life, and the average age is 52. Or other women will say to me, they're like, I'm past it. And it's like, no, you're not past it. You're in it. And you're in it for life. It's a stage for life. And the key with this is that, unfortunately, and we'll talk about it a bit more as we go through, unfortunately, menopause is a risk factor for some diseases, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, dementia, especially Alzheimer's, to name a few. So if we aren't aware of these risk factors, we're not implementing things. So we're never past it. We're in it. Perimenopause is the years leading up to the menopause, that single moment in time. So like for some women, it might be a year or two. For others, it might be like 10 plus years. I'm going to be one of those people. And some women will have really mild symptoms or no obvious symptoms. Other women will have debilitating symptoms. And then before that is actually called premenopause. So basically, when you stop menstruating to perimenopause is premenopause. We tend to more think of those as like the reproductive years, but so that's kind of your definitions of that timeline. So for me, I'm perimenopausal, so I'm still getting my period, but I've been having symptoms since I was in my late 30s. Yeah, and because I am getting a period, I will know when I'm in the menopause because I would have gone 12 months since my last period. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so if I thought of a question as you were saying this, do you know if there's a connection between women who have more symptoms with their menstrual cycle? Or do those tend to be women that also tend to have more menopausal symptoms? Because I know
Yeah.
some people have their menstrual period and how I have almost no issues during my menstrual
same.
cycle. And I have other people who are like throwing up and migraines and all these things, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of indicators there. So basically, what your periods and your basically your menstrual journey was like, especially when you were first starting, so in puberty, and also pregnancy. Like if you've had pregnancies, that can be an indicator of what your menopause journey. And when I talk about menopause in this context, I'm just kind of meaning that peri to like post.
Yes.
It can be an indicator. And then there are other things as well. Like, so I personally, I have a condition called PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And so that condition actually puts me at basically higher chances of having symptoms in perimenopause. Other ones too, like say PCOS, like there's a couple of other hormonal challenges that can be an indicator later on. For example, if you had postpartum depression, you are at a higher risk of experiencing like mood challenges in perimenopause. So yeah, there is a direct correlation, and really it's a bookend: puberty and then the menopause. So like it's because you think about it, like when you hit puberty, suddenly you're wearing deodorant because you're sweating more, hot flashes, night sweats. Remember when we first got our periods and moods were all over the place, cycle was all over the place? Well, that's also perimenopause. So it's kind of like a bookend. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good way to explain it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, okay, thank you for that because it does really help us define and visualize what we're thinking about as you start getting into the exercise fitness component of how to help ourselves through these phases of life. So what are some of the types of exercise that are most effective for women in that phase?
Yeah, and like I'll probably repeat this a few times in this recording, just so like it always depends on the woman, right? Because the thing about the menopausal journey, and again I'm talking period to post, no one woman is the same. So it's different for everyone. And like you might have one woman with no symptoms and she can get away with what she did in her 30s, and then the next woman is doing what she was doing in her 30s, hasn't changed anything, and she's just gained 10 to 20 pounds. So it really depends on the woman, and as with everything, depends on her goals. So what I typically say is like there are definitely guidelines, but they're not rules, right? So it's so important to figure out what works for each individual woman's body. However, like resistance training, so like strength training, weight training, got lots of different names, that should always be the focus. So like strength training, and then yeah, the heavier the better, but in the end, any kind of strength training. So like there is no way I can make some of my 80-year-old clients pick up like 50-pound dumbbells. Like, so if they're using 5 or 10-pound dumbbells and that's their comfort level, it is more effective than using 1-pound dumbbells. So it's like, I always like to say any kind of strength training, because a lot of people will like, they'll read that like you should only do this. Any kind of strength training, provided it's obviously safe for that person, and that it is loaded. So we're looking to load the body. And then like generally speaking, again, because it depends on the person, like women will respond better to like HIIT training and sprint interval training. So we're looking at like resistance training and like your high intense intervals versus like too much time in that gray zone in the middle. So kind of like your endurance. In saying that, it's different for every person. You can have like, so it depends on the symptoms too, right? Because if someone comes to me and their biggest complaint is weight gain, I'm going to be looking at like how much they're working out, what type they're working out. But if someone has no symptoms, but they just want to look after themselves and say they're an endurance athlete, they probably don't need to, like, they probably just need to scale back a little bit on the endurance work to bring the strength training in to complement it. And then I'm a huge believer in like low intensity cardio, like walking, because walking it has so many benefits, including our cognitive health. And then women, as we get older, we're really going to benefit from like jump training, plyometrics. We're going to talk more about bone health later. But then the other one that I always include in this, because people don't think of it as exercise, is mobility and stretching. Like it has to be a part of the protocol, the routine, whatever you want to call it. So, and it has to be there for every woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
That's so
I agree
good.
with that, because like, especially as you get older, I've heard this fact before, but it's very seldom that you like even get up off of the floor. So when you get older, that can even be a struggle. So if you're not actively working on your mobility, even from like me being 20, like from when I was even in my teens to now in my 20s, like I'm seeing a jump in my mobility. And it's because like I've been training on this singular plane of motion, and like you kind of get into a habit of doing that, and then you kind of neglect going on other planes of motion, and then you kind of get stuck. But it's really, really important to work on different planes of motion and work on your mobility, your hip mobility especially too, because there's a big jump from when you're going to school and you're like at recess and blah blah blah, and even like in high school when I was walking to school all the time, up until now where I kind of have a desk job where it's like now my hips are kind of getting a little bit tighter and things like that. So it is super important to work on that form as well.
Well,
It's
for
so
older
interesting.
adults, like one of the biggest fear I find with older adults is a fear of falling, and the second biggest fear is not being able to get back up.
Yeah.
So it's the strength training and the mobility and the stretching. Yeah.
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 Well, and when you were talking about being aware of it through your different phases, like when you're talking about like what you're building in your 20s and in your 30s, I find this, I'm just going to bring it to a really practical example to reinforce what you're saying. So I have 3 kids that do skating on Monday nights. They're 4, 6, and 8. Is she still 8 or is she
Oh
9?
my gosh.
They're little. I'm sorry, Tess. I love you. Too many kids. My point is, I bend down. I like deep squat down. I'm tying 6 skates. You guys ever tie kids skates?
Yeah.
It's exhausting. I'm like, I work out so many mornings a week. By the time I'm on the 6th skate, I'm like sitting and cross-legged on the arena floor, like, I hate tying skates.
Yeah.
This is so much
You
work.
got the thigh action going too, because you got to hold it steady and then tie it.
Yes, and you need to tie it tight, right? So it's like arm strength, and you're like squatted down and you're bent over. And my point is, I'm like, I've had this thought several times because I do tons of lifting and mobility work, and I just think, okay, there must be parents in here that aren't exercising that are like severely struggling with tying their kids' skates, especially if you have more than one kid. So I'm like thinking about those day-to-day things that you're like, can I fulfill my day-to-day tasks without feeling like what you said, oh, I can barely get up after tying all these kids' skates? That's going to give you a really good indication of whether you need to, sign up with one of you guys and get some help with your mobility and your strength training, because it's going to translate into being healthier later in life.
I love that you say that too, because like when I work with clients, I always go like 3 levels of why. And especially with my older clients, it's like, yeah, I want to be stronger. Okay, why? Like, and then when you start going lower, like we're generally going to get to something like, I want to be able to keep playing with my grandkids or something.
Yes.
Like that. So yeah, and that's where like, especially like these guidelines, like they're guidelines, not rules, because not everyone needs to be able to like squat 200 pounds. Some people just want to be able to continue hiking, or they want to pick up their grandkids. So it's like, it's all relative to the person.
Yeah, makes sense. So, thinking about some of the stuff you've said already, let's talk about a bit of the injury prevention.
Mm.
Because, you know, you could, when someone's looking at this, you talked about fears about not being able to get up or falling, but then fears about doing the exercise itself, that you're going to injure yourself or be too sore after exercise, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, my biggest thing with that is like body awareness and understanding our bodies. So many people aren't aware of our bodies. So it's like if something is not feeling right or there's pain, like that's a message that the body is trying to give you. And all too often, like we ignore it. I've done it myself. So like we've got to listen to the body. I talked about recovery already. So it's like we got to make sure that we are prioritizing. Well, I talked about mobility and stretching. So like we're prioritizing recovery. So maybe you got away with working out like 7 days a week in your 20s and your 30s without your rest days. But as we get older, like we need to prioritize those rest days or active recovery days. Like factoring in deload weeks if you need them. We need to focus on sleep. We need to focus on hydration. We need to focus on our protein intake. We need to focus on our mobility and our stretching. And we need to know what's our threshold, because especially I find with women in like, especially perimenopause, when like the weight can start to creep on, it's that old mentality of like, oh, I got to eat less and move more. And that's not going to work. All it's going to do is start to elevate your cortisol, and then your body is going to be fatigued. You might overdo it without even knowing it. Your cortisol is elevated, and we're looking at that increased risk of injury. So, like, I mean, I am a trainer. I know Haley is too. So it's like obviously like working with a trainer if you're unsure. I have a trainer. Like everyone's like, you have a coach? I'm like, of course I have a coach. Like, uh, because I know that like if I was programming my own workouts, I would probably overprogram. So it's like having someone to help guide you and kind of know when it's like, okay, yeah, it's time for a deload week. Or you know what, like you're not prioritizing sleep. So it's like and one of the other big things that I always think of with this too is that like we need, like you talk about like staying active with minimizing the risk of injury, like choosing activities that you enjoy. Because if you're doing something that you don't like because you're told you have to, you're probably not going to be 100% present. So you're probably not going to be completely in tune with how your body is moving through the movement patterns. So it's like choose things that you enjoy. And then if you're unsure, that's when you're working with a coach to make sure that you are having the proper form, that maybe there's periodization into your programming, making sure that you're not overtraining is a big one. Because even that, like the training load and stimulus changes for most of us as we get older. So it's like having someone that is educated on what you need, but mostly what you don't need.
Yeah. Something popped up for me when you were speaking on that, and just to kind of hit home the fact that like your brain kind of like lies to you, but your body will always tell the truth. I was listening to a podcast, not this one, unfortunately. Sorry, I cheated on this I know. Sorry, Emily. And it was actually Diary of a CEO, and he was interviewing a psychiatrist, and she said that your brain can lie, but your body always tells the truth, obviously. And I related that back to like, even when you were saying, Fiona, like you overtrained or you can overprogram. And that's an exact example of what can happen. Right. And back when I was overtraining, like my period was gone, all of my body was telling me something was wrong. And the habits that I was doing, not okay, but my brain, I was like, I'm fine, it's fine, like I'm all good. But you listen to your body, and it's so important to be in tune with that and actually look and be aware of the symptoms that it's telling you, because it is so knowledgeable, and just reactive to like what you're doing to it, so it knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I love the complement between more passive care. When I think about one of the things, so I'm doing part-time chiropractic care right now, or my husband runs our clinic mostly, and I'm just in the clinic every once in a while. But for years, especially earlier on as a chiropractor, I was just like, I would start to feel so frustrated with people who keep coming in with the same issues, because a lot of it is due to inactivity. And it's like, you'll adjust them, you'll adjust them, you'll adjust them. And, you know, it will relieve their symptoms temporarily, but a lot of the same issues just continually come back. And that's where, you know, you can give them exercises and stretches, but unless they have that accountability, like getting a trainer is the most ideal scenario. Cause it's like, yes, you come into a chiropractor and you're in crisis mode because you've had the injury. It's like, yeah, we're going to fix you up. We're going to get you going again. And now you need to get back to your training, because that's going to help you maintain feeling better and being able to function better. And then, of course, you can use adjustments regularly to make sure your nervous system is functioning well, so that you can have peak performance during your lifts. Like, it's so complementary, all of these services, but you can't only rely on passive care, getting your massage, getting your adjustment, and that's it, right? The same way when you train, you can't neglect taking care of your body, getting adjustment or getting a massage or doing some cold therapy. Like, you need both in order to be able to function at your best.
Fueling your body too.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's keeping that complementary nature in mind, and what you said, like having the accountability and having the help from someone who has the outside perspective that can see, okay, this is really what it seems like going on. And then making sure you're having the deload weeks or the things that you said, right? It's so good.
Especially too, because like we live with ourselves. So it's really hard to see changes or things because it's so gradual. But if you have a third party, like outside perspective, it's so much easier for them to see changes happening, right?
I would say we're our own worst critic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I feel like let's talk a little bit about the effect that having more strength and muscle mass has on your perimenopausal journey. And then you could talk about postmenopause as well, if you'd like.
And I mean, I think the key thing for people to understand is that estrogen and progesterone affect like every system in the woman's body. So when we're going through perimenopause and those hormones are like everywhere, and then we enter the menopause, and then after that they're basically flatline, right? So they are involved in everything, including the way our body like builds muscle, including the way that our heart functions, including the way that our brain functions, like everything. So suddenly we need to make sure that we're implementing other things now that we can't rely on basically those hormones to be the main driver. Because for example, like as we're going through like perimenopause and then into the postmenopause, like we have a reduced response to exercise and protein stimulus. So that basically means like our muscles don't respond like they used to both protein intake and exercise. And because there's this decreased response, and then we talked about before, like muscle loss, like because we are basically at risk for an increased rate of muscle loss, this then trickles down to reduced strength, reduced power, reduced ability to gain muscle and for the muscles to repair, basically reduced integrity of the muscle contraction as well. And this is because there's like less glucose being pulled into the muscle because we don't have the hormones functioning like they used to for all of these processes to happen. And then I find for most women at this time of their life that these changes that are happening, like the biggest impact is on body composition. Because if we're not, like muscle is essential for health and longevity. Like it just is. And so if we're not focusing on prioritizing strength training and building that muscle mass and strength, I find for a lot of women, like I said, the biggest impact is on body composition and in particular, like the visceral fat. So we're talking about like around our abdomen there. Unfortunately, as well, during the menopause transition, like there's increased muscle atrophy, which can lead to sarcopenia. There's also increased total body inflammation during this time as well. So the body responds differently to it did before. So if we're not prioritizing strength training to either minimize or basically eliminate these risks, because I am a firm believer that basically, well, you can build muscle in this time of your life. Like I am proof of that. So if we don't prioritize this strength training, it unfortunately, because of basically the hormonal changes that we're going through, we are increasing our risk of like changes in body composition, an increased loss of muscle, higher risk of sarcopenia. We're going to talk about bone density later. And even just like that power, we're talking about strength, we're talking about like our balance, like everything comes in here. Because if you fall and you don't have the strength, then you can't get up, right? Like all of us are going to fall at some point. I fall down the stairs all the time in my house. My husband makes fun of me. But it's like, okay, so if you were to fall, do you have the strength to get up? So unfortunately, like, yeah, going through the menopause transition does have a huge impact on our muscle mass, our muscle strength, our muscle power, our ability to gain muscle. But there's things that we can do.
Yeah. And what do you say to women who are already at this point where they feel so exhausted? Like, I feel like there's lots of times for women that they're like, we're so tired, or, oh, we're so busy, or I feel like there's this like apathy. I'm not like harping on you if you feel that way. What, you know, it's true.
Yeah.
Right. And so what is your encouragement for them? Because there's so many times, I don't know, I have competing thoughts that go through my head in that scenario. I was like, suck it up, buttercup. You know how many times I was exhausted during let's get her done, right? But then there's the other aspect where it's like, well, is your body telling you need rest? But if you're not training and you're resting all the time and now you're exhausted, you do have to have the push through as well, right? So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, and I'm generally like, if someone is saying that, if someone's saying like, no, I just don't have the energy to like strength train even twice a week, I then turn to lifestyle.
Yes.
So I'm looking at everything else because it's like, or if someone says I don't have time.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Time.
Podcast. But anyway, I'll just be like, okay, so how much time did you spend on Instagram yesterday? So yeah. That's when I start looking at other factors. So is that person potentially overtraining somewhere else? So maybe they're doing too much endurance for their body now, or maybe they're not prioritizing sleep, or maybe they're not fueling their body properly. Maybe they're not hydrating properly. Because obviously, like if someone is tired, they're more likely to have incorrect form. So we need to make sure that they have their energy for their workouts. But the other thing too is that so many people aren't aware that if you are not moving your body, you're probably going to be really tired.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like, what's my saying? Motion is lotion.
Yeah, I said that the other day
Motion is
at the
lotion.
clinic, and the patient looked at me like, oh, okay. Motion is lotion. It's so true.
Because especially like if you're just looking at like straight up strength training, like I'm not talking about, say, your competitive athlete here who might be doing your super heavy back squats. This is your recreational person who just needs to go into the gym and be just like picking up some dumbbells and moving through some sets and some reps. Like you don't need that much energy to complete that.
Yep.
So if that person is really that fatigued, to me, there are lots of other factors. And to be honest, like that's where like menopause coaching comes in, because there are so many symptoms of menopause that overlap. For example, if someone isn't sleeping properly, is it because you're having night sweats, or is it because your sleep hygiene is poor? Are you low energy because of hormonal imbalance, or because you're not sleeping properly, or because you're not eating enough? So, and then if someone's saying they don't have enough energy, sometimes it's exploring like, when are you working out? Like, what time are you working out? How much food is in your body? Or if you're leaving it until 5:30 because you work 9 to 5, maybe that's not the right time for you, and we need to look at working out like before work or something. So yeah.
I also think
there's
there's a huge mental aspect too, right? To
Oh
look
my
at
gosh,
what have
I
you
was just
been
gonna
telling
say that.
yourself? Yeah, are you always
Yeah.
telling yourself like I'm old? Are you always telling yourself, oh, I'm old?
Yeah. And
Okay,
I
are you
feel like,
telling yourself the truth?
yeah, I feel like too, like you can get into a mindset of like, oh, it's my hormones, so like I can't do anything about it, or I can't do this, I can't do that. But like you said, there's so many different factors going into it than just blaming your high cortisol levels or whatever. Like your environment is so important, and the harsh reality is people just don't want to change. That's why they make excuses, right? So
And I mean, to me, like the whole energy piece, like so much of it is about how we're nourishing and fueling our body.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's huge, and that can affect your mental state, your emotional state, and all of it kind of loops together, right? But let's talk about how, because we don't want to run out of time for the bone health component, because we said we were coming back to it, right?
Yeah.
Muscle is so important to have muscle mass on your body. Tell us about how it affects your bone health and prevention of osteoporosis, etc.
Yeah, and like this is something I'm so passionate about. Like I actually want to do a certification specifically on training women with osteoporosis. So, like I said before, like strength training, muscle mass, like it's essential for health and longevity, and everyone should be doing it, not just your 40 plus, right? Every single person should do it. It's like it's going to increase the muscle integrity, the strength, the endurance, the power. It improves like our metabolic rate, our body composition, our blood glucose control. It's good for our joints. It's good for our posture, our balance, our immunity, and then our bone density. And often bone density is like that's the light bulb moment for a lot of women, because strength training actually slows the rate at which we lose bone. And now, especially in women, like our bone loss starts to happen in a couple of years before the menopause, and then like for the first 7 to 10 years, I think it is post menopause. And so we're at an increased risk of like basically decreasing our bone mineral density during this time. So we've got the strength training is slowing the rate at which we're losing bones, but it can also help to build bones. Like our bones are alive. Like they're living tissues. They are amazing at adapting to things, but they can only adapt if they're given the tool that they need to adapt to. So we're looking at not just strength training here. Like the other thing that's super important for bone health is actually like jumping and plyometrics, provided that's safe for your body. So essentially, we're looking at like strength training creates stronger and denser bones. This is going to reduce our risk of developing osteopenia and or osteoporosis, and reduce our risk of fracture. Like when you get older, like hip, spine, and femur fractures, like we want to avoid them at all cost. And then Haley, you mentioned something before about like plane of motion. I loved it, because the thing for bone health is we need this force to be multi-directional. Mm-hmm. So we're basically putting that force on our bones from different directions, and in different planes of motion. And you think like even jumping is going to create a different plane of motion, right? Like skater jumps is like one of my favorite jumping exercise for women, just because you're working on that impact. It's not super high impact, and we've got planes of motion happening there. So yeah, like I mean, honestly, like but your bones love strength training.
That's great.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting too? I was just thinking about this as you're saying it. My mother, who's in her 60s, has never been huge on weightlifting resistance training. I think just didn't enjoy it, or hasn't really been trained in it. But I see her doing quite well in her 60s, and she went down this train of just like finding things she likes to do. So she started Scottish dancing, And it's like, you're jumping, right? You're jumping. It's good for you still. And then she absolutely loves pickleball. So plays pickleball all the time, but at least you're getting that multi-directional and you're stepping and you're jumping and you're going, and it's the game, and the game is fun. And they literally play all the time. Like pickleball people get so obsessed with it. I'm like,
So
it is. It's still important to cycle. I do really, as we're all saying, think it's important to cycle in the resistance training. But again, the whole principle of if you're going to do nothing compared to just finding activities you're going to love and enjoy, and you're going to almost forget that you're doing them, and it's going to keep you active in your 60s and beyond, do that. Just do it.
Exactly.
Like
And
when
there is like a hierarchy too, right? There's like, obviously there's optimal, but there's also like better than nothing, right? Which is that exact example, like pickleball, better than sitting on the couch. Strength training, maybe slightly better to rotate within pickleball, but something is always better than nothing, right?
Yeah, like when it comes to bone health, like honestly, I tell people like the best things you can do are strength training, any kind of strength training, right? Like just pick up some dumbbells, jumping if it's safe for your body. And the other one, and I'm doing a social media post on it this week, is like going for a daily walk or to walk a few times a week wearing a weighted vest. And the vest only needs to be like 5 to 10% of your body weight. Like start at 5%, like it's not much. And
a detail on that I'd love for you to share though, because I've had women who have started on the weighted vest, and I think maybe wore it for too long, too soon. What would be your recommendation? Because I've had women who start with the weighted vest and then they're like, oh man, my ankles and my knees. And would that be just because they do it for too long, too quickly? What do you recommend for easing into that?
Yeah, and it's like everything. Like if we're starting a strength training program from the couch, we're not going to start with like 4 days of heavy lifting a week. We start small. And I always recommend to clients like 5 to 10% max of your body weight. And it's amazing how many people go out and buy something that's 20%. I'm like, why did you do that? So like
overachievers. We're overachievers.
That's what it is.
We start at the 5%, and then we start wearing it like maybe 2, maybe 3 times a week on like a 20-minute walk. And then we can slowly start to increase the frequency first. And then if you want, you could increase that weight, right? We're not going past that 10%. But you don't even have to increase the weight, because I've got some clients who are like, oh, well, I bought the heavier one because what if it didn't have adjustable weights? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like if you stay on that 5%, but you've built from like twice a week to like 5 days a week, essentially like we're just creating load in a different way to adding more weight. And then some people will be like, oh, well, could I just wear a weighted backpack? I'm like, the whole point of a weighted vest is you're loading equally from the front and the back. But yeah, like people will overdo it, because they think, oh, I'm just going to wear it every day and I'm going to wear it for an hour, or I'm going to wear it on my hikes. And it's like, no. Like, it's just like we start small with everything.
Yeah, there's another aspect of it too. And I experienced this one I did a half marathon last year and I got royally injured in my hip. And it was because I felt good during my runs and I pushed it too hard, too fast, just because I was feeling good. So even if you feel good with your weighted vest on the first time, don't do it.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talks.
I use myself as an example to people because mine is basically right on 10% of my body weight. And I live in Canmore, so it's like even just walking my dog, like there's quite a lot of hills. And one of my dog walks, like by the time I get up one of the hills, like I'm like, I am breathing quite a lot heavier at the top. And I'm like, I've worked up a bit of a sweat. And everyone's like, oh, and I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm consider myself to be a very fit person. And I'm at that max end. And like, I'm not going over that 10%. There was absolutely no need. So most people only need that 5%. And I mean, even if it's 3%, right?
Yeah, still makes a difference.
Yeah.
Well, it's looking like it is time for us to wrap up. This has been amazing. We didn't really touch too much on cardiovascular health. Obviously, what we just talked about with the weighted vest, it's going to affect bone and muscle, but then cardiovascular. Did you have anything else you wanted to add in before we wrap up with that?
I think it actually just ties in with what we were just talking about with the weighted vest. Like, because a lot of times people are like, well, how many times a week do I need to work out? And again, it depends on goals. So it's like, I always say, like, the bare minimum that a woman 40 plus should be lifting weights is like twice a week. 3 to 4 would be the ideal. But then, I mean, you have competitive athletes that are going to have more. But again, it all comes down to what your goals are and what your symptoms are. Because if someone's like, yeah, like you've got to look at that whole picture to see what the body can handle. But it's like, the 40 plus women, like, strength training should always be a part of your routine. Start with twice a week. Then maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4. Working with a trainer to know when you need to kind of ease back, and making sure you enjoy it. Like, it's got to be activities that you enjoy. Yeah.
I love that. That's so good. Thank you so much for being on today, Fiona. This was a delight. I'm going to put your contact in the show notes so that you guys can reach her. In the meantime, we just want you to share the show because we want to help as many women as possible to feel strong and confident and energized, especially through their different phases of life. So make sure you leave us a rating and review. If you haven't clicked the subscribe button yet, come on, guys. Now's your chance. And be free, feel fresh, and live on fire.